Hello, my name is Rhianna, and today I'm gonna talk about The Secret History by Donna Tartt. So I filmed my experience reading this book, and I gave my thoughts at like different sections of the book. So if you've read this book, you can like go through and listen to my thoughts as the story progresses. If you haven't read this book, I recommend reading it prior to watching this video, but if you have no intention of reading it, I mean, you could just hang around and see what the book is all about. Why not? And to just give you a quick overview of this book, this book is about a man named Richard, and he's reflecting on his time at university where he made friends with this group of people, and they ended up together committing quite a heinous act. And yeah, that's the book. And I think what makes this book really special is its use of language. There are so many great words in this book, and I think it really reignited my love of language and the way it can be used to present an idea, and the way that your word choices can like impact the way what you say is interpreted. And yeah, I wrote down just a few of my favourite words that were used in this book. Mollified, scrapple, bilious, platitude, impetus, imbued, virulence, perfunctory. I'm now going to pass over to me a couple of weeks ago, giving my initial thoughts on this book. So I've now made it to chapter 5, page 194, and yeah, what has happened so far? So at the beginning of the novel, quite famously, we are told that a character named Bunny is killed by the narrator and his group of friends, and that like sets up the whole story, because as you read through the book, you're curious as to why this group of friends end up killing Bunny. So after we get that revelation at the beginning, we are then introduced more thoroughly to our narrator Richard, and it's written from his like first person point of view, and he's like reflecting on his time at university. And this gives the narrative voice a really interesting quality, because can you really trust what he's saying? I love that kind of thing. At one point he mentions The Great Gatsby and how he feels like Gatsby because he's from like not from money, whereas a lot of his peers are from money, and so he kind of feels like he doesn't fit in the same way Gatsby does. And I think that's an interesting comparison, because in The Great Gatsby we are told the story from the point of view of Nick Carraway, and it's also him reflecting on his time with Gatsby, and so it's an unreliable narrator. Can you really trust what he's saying? And the same thing is true here. Can't really trust what Richard is saying. And at the beginning of the book, Henry meets these 5 peers. He meets Henry, Bunny, Francis, and also these twins, Camilla and Charles. And these 5 people are in the same class with a man named Julian, and Julian teaches them a lot about Greek and Latin and philosophy, and it's really difficult to get into this class, so Julian doesn't accept many new students, but he accepts Richard. And so Richard joins this class and gets to know these students, gets to know Julian. And in the first part, in one of the seminars that they have, Julian is talking to them about let me get the quote. So he's talking about how you can lose the maddening self. So he talks a bit about how we have this like obstinate little voice in our heads that torments us, and like the idea of like removing oneself from that and being more primitive and animalistic, so you're not like burdened by like our like extreme self-awareness, you know, because we are so self-aware, but also so self-aware of like our flaws and things. So that was an interesting discussion they had, and that links quite well to future happenings in the book. So then another thing that happens in the beginning is Richard and Bunny go out for dinner, and it's quite an interesting scene because Bunny pays for the taxi, but then after they've spent a lot of money, and you know, Richard doesn't have a lot of money, whereas all of his peers in this class do, and Bunny says that he's forgotten his wallet, which isn't true because he paid for the taxi, but Richard isn't aware of this, and so he's starting to stress out because he can't afford to pay and cover the bill, but he hasn't been quite truthful about the fact that he doesn't have a lot of money because he wants to fit in. And so Bunny ends up calling Henry, and Henry comes and pays the bill for Bunny. And it's quite an odd happening because Richard is like curious as to why Henry keeps bailing out Bunny. So Henry seems to keep paying for Bunny, because Bunny gives the impression of having a lot of money, but apparently his parents actually don't, because they like lost their money. So Richard speculates at different points about why Henry is actually like supporting Bunny to such an extent, because although they say they're friends, they don't really seem to like each other that much. And so then it's the winter break, and Richard is left in Vermont on his own because all of his friends go away for winter because they have the money to do so. And Richard stays in this really bad room with a hole in the roof, and he's freezing. He's really in a bad way. He's basically dying. And he thinks that there's no way of saving himself because he has no one there to support him. And then Henry returns. So Henry was in Italy with Bunny, but he comes back early and he saves Richard from this fate of freezing to death. And then things become a bit peculiar and a new mystery enters the narrative. So his friends all return from winter break, but they become quite distant, and Richard is really curious. They're not answering their phone, and then he goes to Henry's house to pick up a book that he left there, and he rings. He sees this like number on a notepad, and in a very nosy manner he rings that number, and he comes to discover that Henry has booked 4 plane tickets to Argentina. And there's a funny part like a few pages later where like Richard is back in his room and he's trying to like focus on his studies, but he's just like, Argentina, why are they going to Argentina? And it's a mystery for the reader too. You're like Richard, you're like, what, why are they going to Argentina? And then Henry ends up sitting down with Richard because Richard is very close to like kind of working things out, and so Henry decides to reveal the truth. And the truth is that it's quite bizarre, but Henry, Francis, Camilla and Charles, in an attempt to release themselves of like the human sentience, I suppose you could say, and an attempt to be like purely primitive, they took some drugs and like did this whole like ritual thing, and during that episode they ended up accidentally killing a neighbor, and that is where chapter 5 begins. So we're curious as to what's going to happen. Bunny seems to be like suspicious of them, and he wasn't really involved in this, so it kind of makes him separate. And Richard is just trying to work out like what to make of it. So hello, it's now the next day. It's a Sunday today, and it's such beautiful weather in London today, and I had so much fun sitting on the balcony in the sun reading more of this book. So I read the whole of chapter 5 today, which is quite a long chapter. It's from page 192 to page 303, and it's just like 100 pages of tension, and it's so page turnery. You have to keep reading. It's difficult to put down because that whole chapter is like the lead up to Bunny's eventual murder. So the characters are trying to work out how to kill Bunny, and Henry is the mastermind behind the whole thing, and they need to, well, they feel that they need to get rid of him because Bunny seems like he's going to spill what they did to other people. He tells Richard, and they see that as a warning, like that he's going to tell other people, because Bunny doesn't know that Richard knows what the group did. So yeah, they're worried that Bunny is going to tell someone and that they're going to be revealed to be murderers, so they want to get rid of Bunny so that doesn't happen. And Richard is quite an interesting protagonist because there's no like moral dilemma within him. He's not like, should I help them like kill Bunny or shouldn't I? Like he just helps them get rid of Bunny, even though it doesn't really involve him. Like he wasn't there the night the farmer died, so he doesn't need to help them, but he does without really debating whether to. And Henry suggests poisoning Bunny, and there's some tension around that, and also it highlights his like psychotic nature because in like seeing how much dosage he would need, he like tests it out on 2 boxes, one of which dies. Like Henry is really like a full-fledged like psychopath. And yeah, I just had so much fun reading those 100 pages. Like it's been a while since I was reading a book that I just like had to get through the pages. Like I was so enticed by the story. And yeah, now we're at the like halfway point, and so the story now becomes after Bunny's death. And yeah. So I've now finished The Secret History, and really this book is really quite amazing. I think you can read it on a surface level and it's so enjoyable, but you can also go like layers and layers underneath that, because there's just so much going on here. You could take any page and dissect it, because there's just many ideas and things. And I love that. And I don't think I'm going to be able to articulate them all here, because I think you need to like study this to really like comb through all the ideas that it's exploring. But I've been going through this book chapter by chapter, so let me continue to do that. So chapter 6 is where the book splits in half. So Bunny is dead, and chapter 6 is all about the lead up to Bunny's body being found. So there has been a freak snowstorm, so Bunny's body has been buried under loads of snow. So he isn't found for a few weeks, which causes quite the media frenzy, and people are intrigued because it's a mystery as to where he's gone. And our main characters, they kill Bunny, so they're trying not to be found out. They don't want to go to jail for it. So there's quite a high level of tension in this part of the book. And to be honest, as a reader, I wanted them to go to jail because they're all really awful people. But the characters don't go to jail. Bunny is found and the media frenzy dies down, and it's suspected that it was a freak accident and our characters get away with it. And then you have Bunny's funeral, and the lives of the characters slowly start to descend into a darkness as a result of the murder that they caused. So Charles starts to drink a lot of alcohol, and Francis starts to have these panic attacks, and Henry becomes quite distant and a bit of a gardener, and he's always been that way, but his stoicism and recluseness is heightened in the time following Bunny's funeral. And Richard does feel some guilt at points, but he also doesn't at other points. Like he does seem quite psychotic, as all the characters do. And then the plot builds and builds to this final showdown in this hotel room where Charles comes bursting in with a gun because he hates Henry and believes Henry's going to kill him, which is understandable because Henry killed Bunny with all of their help. He was the main perpetrator, and then Charles comes in with a gun, and then somehow Richard gets shot, and then Henry gets the gun and ends up shooting himself in a rather dramatic fashion. We also realise that Camilla and Henry are in love at this point, which there were like hints to, but it was never really confirmed. And yeah, big dramatic scene. And then after that we get the epilogue and realise none of the characters end up happy. And the ending is really interesting. So in the end, Richard is having a dream and Henry is there, and he's seeing these like snapshots of historic buildings like the Hagia Sophia and the Pantheon. And then Henry is there and he says like something like he's lost his passport or something. What did he say? Oh yeah, he's saying that he's just having a bit of trouble with my passport. The idea that he's maybe stuck in like a purgatory and he can't like move from it. And the snapshots of like these like historic landmarks, I read online that someone said it was the idea of like Henry being stuck in the past, and I'm not sure. I think I need to think a bit more about this ending and what it means. It reminds me of the ending of No Country for Old Men, where Tommy Lee Jones's character, he sat talking about this like memory of his father, and then he says, and then I woke up. And I think stories that end with like a dreamlike sequence or like a character referencing a dream, to me they speak to the idea that life is a bit dreamlike and like death is kind of the point of waking up. But I don't know, I just think about that ending a bit more. Like with the ending, I kind of want to think about the book a bit more too. But overall, here's what I liked about the book. One of the main things I liked about the book is its use of language. I loved the vocabulary in this. There were so many words that I underlined because I wanted to remember them, because it just, I love language and how there are multiple different ways of saying the same thing, or how like words can be synonyms but also they have slightly different meanings. And yeah, Donna Tartt really thought about the language that she was using in this. I heard her talking in an interview and she said that she's trying to paint a canvas with a paintbrush the size of an eyelash. And I think that's very true. She's really like thinking about each sentence she writes, and it makes reading one of her books such an experience because of that. And yeah, so that's one of my top things, the language used. The second thing I really liked was how this was like such a page turner. Like you're always on the edge of your seat because you're always like waiting to see how something plays out. So in the beginning, you're waiting to see like why they kill Bunny and what that's all about. And in the second part of the book, you're waiting to see like them discover Bunny, and you're waiting to see if the characters are actually going to get away with this murder. And then in the third part of the book, or near the end, you're waiting to see how everything is going to resolve. Like what's going to happen to each of the characters. And I think that makes it so easy to keep on reading because you're always in anticipation of something that's going to happen. And the third thing I liked about this was its references to literature and myths. There are so many in here and I just think that's so fun because each book that is written is in some way influenced by what has already come before it. I think in a way every story is part of the bigger story of all literature that's ever written, and this very much fits well into that canon. And yeah, what a great book. Thank you for watching.